You are listening to the Thoughts from a Page podcast, which is a member of the Evergreen Podcasts Network. My name is Cindy Burnett, and I love to talk about books with anyone and everyone. While listening to my podcast, you will hear author interviews, behind-the-scenes conversations about various aspects of the publishing world, theme discussions with other book lovers, and more. For more book recommendations and a complete list of all of my interviews, check out my website, thoughtsfromapage.com, and follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Thoughts From A Page. In 2022, I would love for you to join my Patreon group. I offer at least 3 bonus episodes a month. There's a Facebook group where everybody that's on Facebook chats books, and we are currently reading advanced copies of books and chatting with the authors pre-publication. I recently added another early read. For April, we will be reading Linwood Barclay's new fabulous thriller, Take Your Breath Away, and meeting with him on Zoom. I am in the process of scheduling several more. Thanks to those that already participate, and I hope you will consider joining us. Today, I am chatting with Rosie Walsh about the love of my life. Rosie is the author of the international bestseller Ghosted. The book was published in 35 languages and has sold more than 1.5 million copies. She came to writing after a career in factual television, which took her to some of the remotest places on Earth. She wrote her first novel while living in South America, where she met her partner George. They now live in Devon in the UK with their 2 young children. I hope you enjoy our conversation. And now for a quick break. For the last year, I have been focusing more on my health and eating habits. In connection with that, I have started drinking AG1 in the morning. When I started drinking AG1 daily, I could feel a real difference in my health and energy levels. That is because AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that supports your body's universal needs like gut optimization, stress management, and immune support. Since 2010, AG1 has led the future of foundational nutrition, continuously refining their formula to create a smarter, better way to elevate your baseline health. I recommend AG1 to all of my family and friends because the company has a team of doctors and scientists. It is tested for 950 contaminants and is NSF certified for sport. It is formulated based on the latest science, and it maintains high quality standards. Thanks AG1 for sponsoring my show. AG1 is a supplement I trust to provide the support my body needs daily. If you want to take ownership of your health, it starts with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/thoughtsfromapage. That's drinkag1.com/thoughtsfromapage. Check it out. And now back to my show. Welcome, Rosie. How are you today?
I'm very well. I'm sitting in a lovely room with a lovely view looking out over the late afternoon sun here in Devon. How are you?
I am really great as well, and I'm super excited to speak with you because I loved Ghosted so much, and then I was thrilled to pieces you had another book coming out, and I loved it equally as well. So I can't wait to talk about the love of my life.
Thank you. That's it's nice to hear when so many people have loved your first book. It's absolutely terrifying bringing out the second. Great deal of pressure I put myself under to write something that people would love as much.
Well, I do think that is really hard. When you've had a first book that has resonated so well with people to then worry about the second one coming out into the world. But I mean, a GMA pick, and I've seen so many great reviews, so it's obviously doing quite well, which is wonderful.
Yes, it has been joyous, actually. The process of writing this thing was pretty torturous. So I am really, really, really thrilled that it's turned out so well, because you just don't know when you're deep in process. It feels just as likely this will be the worst book you've ever written as it will, the best, and anything that could turn into a bestseller.
Well, I have so many questions for you, but before we dive into those, I'd love for you just to give a quick synopsis of The Love of My Life for those that won't have read it yet.
So The Love of My Life is the story of Emma and Leo, who to the outside world would seem to be the perfect couple. They're both successful in their careers. Emma is a marine biologist and Leo writes obituaries for a London broadsheet newspaper. They've got a lovely daughter. They live in a ramshackle old house in a really beautiful part of London. And, they have plenty of friends and family, all seems well. However, when we meet them, Emma is waiting to find out if her cancer treatment has worked. And Leo is dealing with his many feelings in the way he knows best, which is to write her obituary in secret. But this, of course, turns out to be something of a disaster, because in in the process of basic fact checking about his wife's life, Leo discovers that Emma is not who she says she is. What follows is a really traumatic journey for Leo, who is discovering that the love of his life is a story, no more than a story, and for Emma, who is forced to confront a past so awful that she spent her entire adult life trying to bury it.
So I was on the edge of my seat as I was reading, dying to know what her secret was and how everything was going to unfold. How did you come up with the idea for this one?
So the way I conceive each book is different every time, but I think what unites all of them is, and I think probably any book that's ever been written, is that writers, I believe, have a part of their brain that sort of lights up. You'd be able to see it in a functional MRI scan that just lights up when they hear or see something that could be the seed of an idea. And for me, that activation happened at a dinner about 9 years ago. Have to be honest, it was a pretty disastrous dinner. There was no chemistry between us and the couple that we were trying to sort of make friends with because we just moved to a new town. The conversation was pretty dry, but the guy in this couple mentioned that he was writing an obituary, and my interest was immediately piqued. And what I didn't realise, and actually a lot of people don't realise, is that obituaries are almost all written in advance. And when you think about it, it makes perfect sense because, they're generally published within an hour or two of the person dying. So, of course, they've been prepared. But I had not realised that. I'd not put two and two together. And I was instantly fascinated. And I sort of glazed over and sort of left the conversation at the table and started thinking about, what it means to try and tell the story of somebody's life and how much agency we as people who are being written about, have over our stories. And I just grabbed my phone and I wrote an email to myself that just said, obituary writer starts researching somebody's life, discovers that they're not who they say they are. And a few months after that, it became obituary writer starts researching his wife's life and discovers she's not who she says she is. And as soon as I had that, I knew that I'd got what I'd been longing for, really, which was another story ostensibly about love, but bound up in a really dark, fast-moving mystery. And so the premise for the book has remained constant since then. My elevator pitch has not changed.
I was wondering that if, as you wrote it and kind of delved into it, if things had changed. I also had another question for you. Not long before I read your book, I watched the New York Times obituary. Well, it's a documentary about the obituary writers for the New York Times called Obit. Have you watched that?
I have, and it wasn't available over here, so I had to I had to beg and plead with the filmmaker to let me see it, and she did, and I'm so grateful. What was great about it actually was that there was nothing new in it for me, and I know that for anyone else watching it, it would have been fascinating and a real eye opener. But for me, actually, even though I loved it, I thought it was a beautifully made film. It gave me a bit of confidence in my writing and made me realise that I was on the right track and that the research I've been doing was, in the right direction, and that I had managed to capture the essence of that, that most fascinating of worlds, which is, largely unexplored and generally ignored. When I went into the Daily Telegraph in London to spend time on their obits desk, they kept apologising. Oh, God, sorry, this is so boring. There's not much going on. And I just don't think they had any idea how fascinating their work is. Because, of course, it's not about death or dying. It's about life and living.
I agree. I just thought it was the most interesting documentary, and I watched it with my teenagers and my husband, and we were all completely enthralled with the process and the fact that what you just said earlier, which is that most of these obituaries for famous people or notable people are already written, and all they have to do is kind of add in the final details. I just thought that was so interesting. They could go back and go through all these filing cabinets and pull out things that had been written for 20 years about somebody. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and what's lovely about that is that the filing cabinets where stock obituaries are filed are still physical, because it would take years for all of the information that's collected to be digitized. A lot of these stock obituaries are just a collection of newspaper clippings from decades ago. And I loved that. I loved rifling through, decades of fascinating people in their lives, and all of them were still alive. They were all still alive, just these collections of press clippings and articles and thoughts and half-written pieces. It's really fascinating, and to see some of them being written up quite heavily, 30 years ago, which suggests to me that they perhaps suffered a serious illness 30 years ago, hence being written up. And that is the life of the obituary writer. They live in a state of sort of feverish preparedness for just about anyone to die. So, it doesn't matter how young they are. If anyone's remotely famous, they've probably got a stock obituary. And if they become ill or cancel a public engagement, then they will definitely have a stock obituary, because, the news desk will be thinking, what's happened? Why have they not appeared for their gig or their football match or whatever? But the obituary writer or editor will be thinking, oh, I better get them on file quickly.
It's just fascinating. I've paid so much closer attention to obituaries when famous people have died ever since I watched that. So then, of course, your book came along. And I thought, how funny, I just watched this and now we have this same topic. It's really interesting. And I think the world always works that way. When I find out more about one thing, then suddenly it's more places for me. Let's talk about the GMA book selection. That had to be so exciting. How did you find out? What has that been like?
I mean, what a roller coaster. So my life the last few months has been pretty chaotic, because we moved from a city to the countryside, and the house that we were buying wasn't ready. So we had to live in a rented place for a few months. And my 4-year-old started school, and that, like, a lot happened during that time. We also had a couple of really difficult bereavements. So much has been going on that I've really not been focused very much on my writing career. I've been just very much sort of heads down in the trenches of parenthood. And I had a meeting with everyone at my publisher, Viking. I don't know, it was about 3 months ago. And, they mentioned the book clubs that they were pitching to. And I sort of nodded politely and, okay, whatever. Because in a million years, I didn't imagine that I'd be picked. And then I remembered a couple of weeks later, oh, yes, they said that if GMA came through, then it would be by the end of this week. And it was 5 p.m. on a Friday. So I just thought, you win some, you lose some. I guess it's not happening this time round. And I wasn't surprised. It was just disappointing, but I wasn't surprised. And then a bit later, I checked my emails, because, of course, it wasn't 5 p.m. in the States. It was only midday. And I had an email from the head of publicity at Viking. And, the news was in the subject line. So, there was no mistaking what had happened. But I still didn't believe it. And I read the email 4 or 5 times before just holding my phone out to my partner. And my poor partner, I hadn't even mentioned him that I was up for the book club, because I didn't think I would get it. So he was just kind of looking at it saying, what? I don't really understand what I'm looking at here. Like, what is this? What does this mean? And it was just the most beautiful thing. I had tears in my eyes. To have gone through the kind of slog that I went through writing this book, and it was a real slog, emotionally, physically, in so many respects. It was difficult, this one. To have gone through that and to come out the other end with a piece of news like that, and to finally begin to see that actually potentially this was a good book that people might enjoy. It made all of the struggle of the last few years worth it. It was amazing. I feel quite emotional just thinking about it, actually.
Well, it's super exciting, and congratulations. I should have said that very first. And I think that GMA just does a wonderful job with their book club selections. They really dive into all the aspects of the book and the author, and I just feel like they really just do a stellar job.
Yeah, I do too. And I think, the creativity that goes along with it, the number of video assets I've had to produce, and written pieces and photographs, and I'm still nowhere near done. That's a really wonderful thing. Like, I've still got more filming to do. I've still got loads more interviews. I've got to write some stuff. I've got Q&As. I really, really love that. As you say, like, they come at it from every angle. And I guess, they have such a diverse readership, the members of the book club, the people who watch GMA. It really feels very inclusive. Whereas other book clubs, not in the States necessarily, but around the world, they're normally, you sort of know what you can expect. Whereas with GMA, I've also noticed the diversity of the books they're publishing is extraordinary.
It is. And I always really like their picks the best. I feel like they have kind of gotten to the top in terms of the books that I like. And I'm always so excited to see what they pick. So I was glad when I saw it was yours.
Oh, what an honor. I can't believe it. And we had a call late last night to say that it charted on the New York Times top 10 bestseller list.
That's so funny that you said that, because I was actually just thinking, as soon as we hang up, I need to go look at the New York Times list, because I don't want to mention it, because I don't know whether it's gotten on it. Congratulations. That's fabulous.
Thank you. As you can imagine, I have not really had much sleep.
I definitely can imagine. Well, that is super exciting. That is truly just wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, it's beyond crazy for me. I mean, it's totally surreal. Ghosted also hit the charts, the top 10. And I was not expecting that. But with this one, I was absolutely certain that it wouldn't, for various reasons, which I won't go into. But there was not a part of me that thought that it would make it. So that call last night was mind-blowing.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, let's talk a little bit about what made writing this one so difficult.
Yeah. So, well, you're a mother. I'm sure you have some idea of what it must have been, what it would have been like to try and write probably the most important novel of your career whilst you had two very young children.
I can't imagine.
So when I started writing The Love of My Life, my son was 5 months old, my first son.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it was an incredibly difficult time in my life. I suffered birth trauma and, my mental health in the months that followed was really not great. Nothing extreme or sort of immediately diagnosable, but I was really not in a good place, and trying to get my brain, assemble my brain, organize my brain into some sort of workable beast was incredibly difficult. And every single day I was crippled with mum guilt. What am I doing sitting in this room writing a book? And I didn't really get much done because, if I could hear my baby crying, I went to him. Of course I did. We'd hired him a lovely, lovely nanny, and she was only there 4 hours a day, but I wasn't ready. I was still breastfeeding. I was exhausted. I was getting no sleep. I was full of self-doubt. So, the plotting process, for starters, took months and didn't really get anywhere. And in fact, I found it so tricky, and my brain was just such a bowl of oatmeal that I just, in the end, I gave up trying to plot it and just started writing it blind, hoping that it would come together. And of course it didn't. So I had numerous plot problems because I'd started out in such a sort of befogged state. I also, in my personal life, a lot happened. I went through early motherhood twice, and I went through pregnancy with my second child, my daughter. I'm really bad at being pregnant.
I am too. It was just awful. That's not a fun time.
Absolutely awful. Both times were the worst 9 months of my life, hands down. So I went through that. I also had a brush with serious illness myself. And then, of course, we had the pandemic. So by the time I was trying to finish this book, I was in a state of just real anxiety and probably depression too. And I was heavily pregnant. We were in first lockdown. Everyone was really afraid. The world just stopped. It was so frightening. And so I really thought at times I was not going to be able to finish this book. I really thought I was actually not going to be able to be a writer anymore, because, of course, when you're in that place, your ability to remember the times when you have been capable and the times when writing has gone very well are not available to you. So, yeah, it was a very, very dark time. And a lot of the editing I did in what just felt like a fog of hopelessness and fear and so on. And, at times I just thought, what am I doing? Like, this is insane. I should not be doing this. I should not be writing this. But I'm so glad that I persisted, because actually just that very slow, gentle layering, which is all I was capable of, I think made the book much stronger and made the emotional content a lot more raw and accessible.
I do think it's so difficult those first few months with a young baby, because you're tired already from being pregnant for all that time. And then you're so much more tired. My first two are 22 months apart, and I truly don't feel like I can remember those first 2 years that they were both around, because it is a fog. I can't imagine trying to write a book. And then on top of it, you had the pandemic. And I remember my husband and I were talking about the pandemic when it first hit, and you were referencing how scary it was, because people really didn't know, okay, how horrible is this? And to have young kids at that point would have been very difficult, because mine were on their own. I mean, they were home, but they were teenagers, so they didn't really need me taking care of the little things or, any of that kind of stuff. I just can't even imagine all of that at one time.
Yeah, it was incredibly intense. And at times I thought I was going to go under. And it's when I talk to other mothers who are writers and didn't write when their children were really young, or who aren't writers, I'm reminded that what I did was impossible and actually crazy. I don't know why I persisted in doing it. But, equally, I had, all of these crazy book deals for Ghosted happened when I was pregnant with my son. And, I was just caught up in the momentum of it. And, the belief you have as a writer that you've just got to keep on producing and producing and producing for your career to have any longevity. And of course, that's not true. It ended up taking me 4 years to write that book. It was meant to take a year. It took 4. And, here I am in the extraordinary position of being in the top 10 New York Times top 10 bestseller list again. It hasn't made a scrap of difference. And what's been really lovely, actually, is hearing so many readers on social media saying, "Oh my God, I love Ghosted. I've been so excited waiting for Rosie's next novel." And so none of that pressure I put myself under was necessary. None of it.
But I think it's natural. And you probably had people asking you, what are you working on now? When's your next book coming? Because I know that's a common question, not meant to put pressure, but more, as you just said, because people love Ghosted. So they're like, I can't wait for her next book. But on the flip side of it, it probably was creating pressure for you. But as you said, it worked out and your book turned out perfectly. And there's been great happiness around it. And obviously, it's going to be very successful.
Even if it only spent 1 week on the list, that would be enough for me. It's as my partner said to me this morning over breakfast, this is something that nobody can ever take away from me. My book really has been read by so many people that it hit the list. And it's for me, it's not just about being able to write that on the front cover of future books, New York Times bestselling author. It's got nothing to do with that. It's just that beautiful moment of pride and vindication after that incredible slog of blood, sweat and tears to know, oh, wow, I wrote a book that people really, really, really want to read. And for me, even if my career failed from this point on and nothing else happened again, I would always have that. It's a really beautiful validation. And of course, we shouldn't need the validations of things like big book clubs and bestseller lists, because deep down we should know if we've done something good. But good Lord, it certainly helps, especially when you're exhausted.
I was just going to say it's very validating. And then you mentioned that as well. But yes, and not so much that you need the validation, but just knowing that you spent all this time on it and that it's making its way out into the world. There are just so darn many books coming out all the time. So it's just nice to know that people are recognizing yours.
It is. And actually, today I'm in a marathon of 8 hours of radio and podcast interviews. But what is really, really beautiful for me is how much people have clearly loved the book. And I don't think they're making up. You can tell when somebody has really loved your novel. And that for me is wonderful, to be, in the company of bookish people who read a lot of books, and to know that they've loved your book there's no feeling quite like it, really. I feel incredibly lucky today.
I bet you do. And I think you're exactly right. I think when people really love it, it shines through and you can tell in the way they're talking about the book and the questions they're asking. So I definitely think people would not make that up.
I hope not.
What about covers? So I love your US cover, and I was on your website a little bit ago, and your UK cover is so different. So I'd love to just talk about how the two different covers came about.
Well, US jackets and UK jackets, I think historically have always been very different. And that was not something that I knew until I got my first US deal. And it was a great surprise to me, I have to be honest, how differently each publisher approached a jacket. In the UK, for both of my novels, it's been a very sort of typographical approach. And that really worked. It sold more than 500,000 copies in the UK.
Wow.
Which, we're a pretty small country. It's extraordinary. And I'm very glad that I have a really experienced, brilliant, creative editor, because she was single-minded from the beginning. She knew exactly what she wanted. And we went through endless jackets to get it right. And they got there. It was the same process for the UK for this one. Endless jackets, because they knew exactly what they wanted and they wanted to be right. Whereas in the States, the first jacket that they've shown us is the jacket that we've gone with. And that's really interesting to me, because it's not like, they kept getting it wrong in the UK. It's more just that they had a really clear vision. And unless, I guess if you're an editor, unless you're able to do the artwork yourself, it's almost impossible to do that. Whereas I don't know what happens when they're working out how to make a jacket. All I know is that both of my US jackets have been absolutely beautiful. And I get so much feedback from readers about how beautiful the jackets are. And they make me happy whenever I look at them. These are books that I would pick up off the shelf and read without question. And that's a really special thing, because in my earlier career, I used to write a romantic comedy under a pseudonym. The jackets I had, they were really, they did a really fantastic job for what they were. But, they did not advertise books that I would necessarily have picked off the shelf to read. So I'm profoundly grateful for these just very beautiful, very tactile, very grown-up jackets that I get to have now. I cannot stop just stroking my US edition.
It's just stunning. I mean, it's so pretty. And I loved Ghosted as well. That cover is great. And I know we're on a tight timetable, so I'm going to really quickly rush in my last question.
Sure.
What have you read recently that you loved?
Oh my gosh. Well, I one of the unexpected side effects of having a successful book is that you get sent a billion novels to review. And so my bedroom is currently a really sort of anxiety-provoking place because there are just piles of books that I still haven't read. And I want to, I want to help people the way that people have helped me. So I haven't done any reading for pleasure, so to speak, in a very long time because I'm constantly reading books for review quotes. That's not to say that the books I read aren't excellent. But actually, I've read two novels for pleasure recently because of authors that I'm doing events with. So I did an event with Audrain last week, and I finally got to read The Push, which I've been dying to read since I heard it announced in the book press. And oh my gosh, what an outstanding and extraordinary novel. I was breathless, and there was so much identification as a mother as well. I mean, luckily for me, I've not given birth to a psychopathic child, but the awfulness of motherhood at the beginning.
Right.
God, I was right there, and it's just such a visceral reading experience. And now I'm reading The Last Thing He Told Me by Laura Dave because I have an event with her on Saturday. And again, I'm just loving it. It's so good to be swept up in really polished, beautifully observed, pitch perfect, psychological thrillers. It's such a treat to just read something for me. I'm loving it. I might just have to abandon my bedroom pile.
I bet you are. I bet that's crazy too in terms of the number of books you get that people would love a blurb for. I can't even imagine.
It's out of control.
Well, Rosie, thank you so much. This was just delightful. I'm thrilled to pieces that you came on the Thoughts from a Page podcast, and I can't wait for everybody to read The Love of My Life.
Oh, thank you so much. I've loved it too. I really appreciate it.
I'm Ken Harbaugh, host of Burn the Boats from Evergreen Podcasts. I interview political leaders and influencers, folks like award-winning journalist Soledad O'Brien and conservative columnist Bill Kristol about the choices they confront when failure is not an option. I won't agree with everyone I talk to, but I respect anyone who believes in something enough to risk everything for it. Because history belongs to those willing to burn the boats. Episodes are out every other week wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you so much for listening to my podcast. If you like this episode, and I hope you did, please follow me on Instagram at Thoughts from a Page. Consider joining my Patreon group to access bonus content and support the podcast. Tell all of your friends about the show and rate it or subscribe to it wherever you listen to your podcasts. I would really appreciate it. The book discussed in this episode can be purchased at my bookshop storefront, and the link is in the show notes. I hope you'll tune in next time.
I'm Ken Harbaugh, host of Burn the Boats from Evergreen Podcasts. I interview political leaders and influencers, folks like award-winning journalist Soledad O'Brien and conservative columnist Bill Kristol about the choices they confront when failure is not an option. I won't agree with everyone I talk to, but I respect anyone who believes in something enough to risk everything for it. Because history belongs to those willing to burn the boats. Episodes are out every other week wherever you get your podcasts.